Welcome back to the Last Days Book Club, where we are reading the book entitled Pioneers Together by Josephine Cunnington Edwards. This book is a biography of Roy F. Cottrell and his wife Myrtie, who both were born in 1878 and led an exciting life of service and mission in the early days of the young and rapidly growing Seventh-day Adventist Church. In our last reading, after Roy left the church school in Ohio, he attended the first educational convention at Battle Creek, where he was awed and inspired by the headquarters of the Adventist Church. He spent many weeks there at the convention, meeting the most illustrious names in Adventist education at the time, and visiting churches in Michigan, promoting the development of Christian education. At the close of the convention, he was invited to be the dean at the new Fox River Academy, 50 miles east of Chicago. There he joined the carpenters, staff, and students in constructing the new school, and despite extreme cold and living in a tent for 3 months, the construction was completed and school began. On the first day of the 20th century, Roy was called to preach his first funeral sermon. The temperature was below zero. The pipes of the train he took were frozen, and there was no heat. He arrived in time to conduct the ceremony in a small, unheated parlor. Then it was off to the cemetery in the open cold. On returning to the train station, there was no train that night. Roy felt that the first day of the 20th century would be his last. He finally went to the home of the only Adventist family in that town and was greeted cordially by a black family who not only let him spend the night in a warm, heated bed, but fed him a most delicious breakfast before he headed out to the train, which took him back to Fox River Academy. Toward the end of the semester, Roy was invited to attend the General Conference session of 1901 as a delegate, where A.G. Daniels was elected president, and where he heard Ellen White speak many times. By the end of the school year, Roy was invited by the New York Conference to become an assistant pastor to Pastor Burrell of the Buffalo district, who had 6 churches under his care. It was not that far from his home, and Roy was able to drop in on his folks every so often. During his tenure there, on one of his visitations, he encountered a woman in deep grief who sent him away. But touched by her grief, with compassion, he offered hope from the Bible for her grief over her lost daughter. He began studying with her and her family on Tuesday nights, and as they understood the scriptural comfort the Bible offers on death and the resurrection, they became enamored and were eager to learn more. They embraced the Sabbath. The husband gave up his job on the railway, and they became coal porters, as well as their children, who used the funds made from selling books to finance their way through South Lancaster Academy. We pick up our story today in chapter 7, entitled The Romance of Roy and Myrtie. Naturally, Roy thought and prayed about marriage. He knew it to be the will of God, for he who setteth the solitary in families was surely interested in his happiness. But he moved with his usual caution. How often during his life he had heard his father and his grandfather warn against unwise marriages. In his limited experience, he had seen much sorrow. Yet he was lonely, and he believed the wise man when he said, "Whoso findeth a wife, findeth a good thing, and obtaineth favor of the Lord." In Roy's home church, were several eligible young women, and some of the good mothers felt inclined to help Cupid out if he did not move fast enough. One such mother took her foot in her hand, as the old saying goes, and decided to speak to Roy on this delicate matter privately. She lay in wait for him one evening after church, and drew him into a corner with great secrecy. "Now, Roy," she said, "I know you are a little bashful around girls, but I know you are a good friend of my Dora, and a little more friendly with her than with the other young ladies. So I want to encourage you, Roy, for I know she's quite fond of you. And besides that, 3 or 4 other young men are getting pretty serious about her." Roy felt embarrassed and repulsed by such an obtrusive approach. He felt reasonably sure in his heart that Dora had nothing to do with her mother's action. But just the same, the repugnance he felt for the would-be mother-in-law extended to Dora herself. Any friendship which had existed died then and there. In the years since Roy had finished school, he had made the question of a life companion a subject of special prayer. While at Mount Vernon Academy, he had seen many attractive, devoted girls, but not one of them seemed to be quite his ideal. For, in common with many a youth, he had certain dreams of the future with a sweet, gifted, consecrated, companionable girl by his side as his congenial life partner in the work of the Lord. He wanted to be sure that he chose the right one. One day, while absorbed with these long thoughts, he took down the volumes of the Spirit of Prophecy from his little library and looked up the references on marriage. One of these, from page 175 of Patriarchs and Prophets, especially appealed to him. If there is any subject which should be carefully considered, and in which the counsel of older and more experienced persons should be sought, it is the subject of marriage. If ever the Bible was needed as a counselor, if ever divine guidance should be sought in prayer, it is before taking a step that binds persons together for life. Now Roy had noticed one girl, Gladys in particular, and had been peculiarly attracted to her. He knew by certain telltale signs that she liked him too. But something, an indefinable something, rang a warning bell in his heart. He did not want to make a mistake on such a vital issue, for a wrong step such as this could wreck his whole life. One evening after supper, he stopped the kind, motherly dean of girls. "Mrs. Maxson," he said politely, "I wonder if I could have a little talk with you. I am needing some counsel, and since my mother is so far away, I thought you might give me a little helpful advice if you can spare a few minutes." The good woman smiled. "Why, Roy, of course I will," she said. "You come tonight, right after the retiring bell. We can have a talk then without interruptions. I will speak to your dean about it. It will be all right with him, I'm sure." That night, after the clock struck 9:30, Roy made his way to the ladies' dormitory and was ushered into the dean's neat sitting room. A warm colored carpet covered the floor, and the sofa in the corner was decorated with gay, fat pillows. A few well-chosen pictures hung on the walls, and the desk, protected with a green blotter, was neat and orderly. Mrs. Maxson offered Roy an easy chair near her own. The kind woman had the happy faculty of putting people at their ease, and Roy began to talk of his interest in the young woman who had attracted him. "You see, Mrs. Maxon," he said, "I'm planning on entering the gospel ministry. And since Gladys has such fine parents and apparently such a happy home life, I... Mrs. Maxon nodded and smiled. She must have been touched by the earnest look on the young man's face, and the way his eyes lit up when he mentioned his chosen vocation. She determined to be very careful here. Lives were at stake. "Gladys is very musical," she mused, her eyes on the wall. "That would be a help to you. She's gifted in meeting people. She makes a good appearance and is intelligent and graceful." All these things Roy knew. He had observed them and had been attracted by them. Mrs. Maxon was not telling him a thing he did not know. His puzzled eyes were on the gentle face of the dean. What was she getting at anyway? "Then you would advise me," he began once, trying to break through seemingly deliberate reserve. "No, no," she cried, a distressed look coming over her face. "Please, do not hurry me, Roy. I want to think this thing through wisely. You see, I have a strange feeling that you are in the balances, and what I say may make you or break you. It is the difference between success and failure, between happiness and sorrow." Saying this, she reached over to the bookcase and took down a volume. Roy recognized it as the Ministry of Healing. Mrs. Maxon's slim fingers turned the pages knowingly until she came to a certain underlined passage. "Listen to this, Roy," she continued. "Love will not be a mere exchange of soft and flattering words. The loom of heaven weaves with warp and woof finer yet more firm than can be woven by the looms of earth. The result is not a tissue fabric, but a texture that will bear wear and test and trial. Heart will be bound to heart in the golden bonds of a love that is enduring." Page 362. Roy felt, as she was reading these words, that the Holy Spirit was actually in that room. He sensed, too, that his counselor was determined to wait until she could be sure of the will of the Lord. "We want your marriage to be like that, Roy," she said kindly. They sat there and talked and read from the Bible and other books until nearly midnight. "Roy," Mrs. Maxon said suddenly, "let us claim the promise of James 1:5. If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, that giveth to all men liberally, and upbraideth not, and it shall be given him. The Lord may give us the knowledge this very night," she exclaimed. With that, they knelt together in prayer. When they rose, the dean spoke most earnestly. "Gladys is a good girl, Roy, but I have a deep conviction tonight that she's not for you. I truly believe that the Lord has other plans for your life. Can you take this without too much heartache? It may save you much sorrow later. Do not be in too much of a hurry to take such a step, my boy. God will, in His own good time, help you select just the right companion." That was to be a never-to-be-forgotten evening. And as Roy sauntered back to his room in the boys' dormitory, he was somewhat stunned, yet not too sad. Indeed, a weight seemed to be rolled from his shoulders, for it was evident that this night He had been definitely led of the Lord, and believing this gave him courage to go on. But now, for some little time, Roy Cottrell had been in the ministry, as he had longed to be. He was working hard every day. Still, he had no sweetheart, nor any prospect of one. After long hours of pastoral or evangelistic work, he would reach his room, and the cubicle he called his own seemed very bleak and lonely. He could not put his finger on exactly what was wrong, but it somehow needed a feminine touch. He knew that if his mother were in the room for 10 minutes, it would have an entirely different appearance. But what she would do, he could not imagine. Sometimes he would take thread and needle and try to sew a button on a shirt or mend a rip in one of his garments. He could not understand why the curls of lint would accumulate so quickly under his bed, or why his tie rack would become so disarranged that it looked like a nest of angry snakes. He often sighed and felt some pity for his mother, marveling that she could keep such a neat, orderly house with seemingly so little effort. He had never really appreciated the work involved in washing, ironing, mending, and cleaning so much as he did now, since he had to do these things for himself. While Roy was serving as associate pastor of the Buffalo Church, unexpectedly, a remarkable incident occurred that was destined to change his whole life. Conducting prayer meetings often was his duty. As usual, the attendance was not large, but it was a most spiritual time. Roy spared no effort to make these gatherings intensely interesting and uplifting. On this particular evening, he noticed that a strange young lady came to the meeting with the Edwards family. She was a brown-haired lass with lovely blue eyes and a demure, earnest manner. Roy did not know it at the time, but for that very evening, Sidney Edwards had made entirely different plans for this young friend and himself. Knowing her love for music, he had purchased tickets for a concert being held that same evening. To his amazement, she declined his invitation. "Why, Sidney? I just told your mother that I would go with her to prayer meeting tonight. You had better come along too." "Not me," the young man declared. "You just ask Mother to let you off and she'll understand." "See, Myrtie, old fogies always go there on Wednesday nights, and they get up and say the very same things over and over again. It gets on my nerves to hear them praying and testifying. Come on, Myrtie. You'll really hear something if you go with me." But Myrtie was not the bit of fluff and thistledown Sidney had imagined her to be. She shook her head. "I do wish the concert were on some other night, Sidney," she said. "You see, I have gone to prayer meeting all my life, and I guess I like to hear the things you say that get on your nerves. I am better off for that midweek prayer meeting." "Oh, cut the preaching, Myrtie," Sidney had protested. "I didn't think you were such a saint as all that. But go on. I'll tell you about what you missed later. You'll be sorry." On such a slender thread as this often hangs our destinies. If Myrtie had gone to the concert, she would have missed, but she did not go, and she did meet the young minister who conducted the prayer meeting. She had been eager to meet him, for he was the grandson of the minister Elder Roswell F. Cottrell, who had brought her father into the church. When Mrs. Edwards introduced them, Roy said the name over meditatively. "Ball. You are from Ellicottville, you say? Would you by any chance be related to the elder D.A. Ball, who accepted the truth under the preaching of my grandfather?" "Indeed I am," Myrtle assured him, "and I have heard of your grandfather all my life. My father always loved him and called him dear old Elder Cottrell. Indeed, they always wrote to each other, and father used to send him a little gift every Christmas." "Why, I remember that," Roy exclaimed. "Wasn't your father a mission worker in the West Indies once?" Myrtle nodded, her eyes shining. "I remember his sending grandfather a beautiful silk neck scarf from there. He wore it all that winter, and I remember his telling people who sent it and where it came from. He was very proud of it." "I helped pick that scarf out," Myrtle smiled. Roy almost forgot his duties. So eager was he to talk with this charming young woman. After he had gone back to the door and shaken hands with the rest of the people, he was pleased to see that Myrtle had not yet gone home. She was waiting for Mrs. Edwards, who was still visiting with some other friends. He went over to her and cleared his throat. "Miss Ball," he said, "are you planning to attend a camp meeting next month at Oswego?" "I'm going, and I hope you do. We probably have a lot of friends in common." The thought occurred to him that this lovely young person might be, she just might be, the one for whom he had been waiting and praying. The thought filled his heart with happiness. "I'm on my way to join my father," Myrtle told him. "You see, he's holding an evangelistic effort in Syracuse. He told me in his last letter that he plans to close the effort in time to be at the camp meeting." "I may see you then," Roy told her politely, and both young people went their ways happily. At the appointed time, 10 days before the meeting was to begin, Roy joined the other young preachers and workers to help pitch camp. Working like a beaver, he hoisted tents, raked debris, hauled away trash, carried shears, and drove stakes. At last, the young army had the campground shipshape. As the first day arrived, people began to come from everywhere. Horses, rigs, buggies, carriages, spring wagons, farm wagons, and carryalls filled the roads and entered the grounds. In those days, camp meeting was a great event in the lives of Seventh-day Adventist people. As soon as one was over, they began to look forward to the next annual gathering. The whole place bustled with activity as happy families set up housekeeping in the numerous tents. Children ran off to water, or perhaps went to the straw tent to help fill the ticks with straw for temporary mattresses. Passing down the rows of canvas tents, you could see supper laid out on some tables, and the children with bowls eating crumbled up Graham bread and milk. At that time, the denomination had no missionary volunteer department. During the pre-camp planning time, Roy was appointed to take charge of the young people's meetings. With rare foresight, Roy invited Myrtle Ball to serve as pianist at the youth tent. Her ready assent pleased the young minister, though he was careful to maintain his dignity and not show his delight outwardly. Together, they planned soul-winning musical programs for the series, and it gave Roy much confidence to see Myrtle sitting near the piano, ready to serve whenever she was needed. Just before the close of the meeting, Roy invited Myrtle to spend a day with him at Niagara Falls. Both of them fervently hoped to keep their friendship a secret, for the present at least. It would save them from a lot of teasing. A few days later, they met by appointment in Buffalo for their outing together at the falls. Boarding a suburban car, they sped along to the Niagara River and crossed one of the suspension bridges over to the Canadian side to view the scenic beauty along the western rim and the wild majesty of the Whirlpool Rapids. Noon came, and Roy remarked, "Let's find a good restaurant." But Murty replied, "On a fine day like this, why be cooped up inside? Here is a fruit stand. Those grapes, bananas, and peaches look delicious. From a bake shop, we could probably get some good bread. Then we could go out in the park by the Horseshoe Falls to eat." Soon, they took the sacks of food to a cozy nook in full view of the misty rainbow hues of the Great Cataract, and there enjoyed their first meal together. The gentle spray from the falls cooled their faces, and though no intimate word was spoken, both afterward admitted that in their hearts were many rosy dreams of future days. After lunch, they roamed about on picturesque Goat Island, donned rubber suits to explore the Cave of the Winds, then took a joyride on the puffing little steamboat, the Maid of the Mist. Both agreed it was the end of a perfect day, or was it the prelude to a still more delightful day? They got away with their little secret cleverly, and few people in the conference suspected their attraction for each other. That fall, when Roy met his conference president, Elder G.B. Thompson, that worthy gentleman said, as they walked together one afternoon, "Roy, do you know I've been thinking about you lately? We're a little worried about you. Don't you realize, my boy, that an unmarried preacher is only half a man?" Roy had to smile at that. But Elder Thompson was serious. "I mean it, Roy. You really need a wife, whether you realize it or not. Half the matchmakers in the conference have given up hope for you." "What do you suggest, sir?" Roy asked, hardly able to control his laughter. What would Elder Thompson have to say if he had seen the letter Roy had mailed to Murty only a short time before? He had made his proposal to the lovely lady as poetic and preacher-like in style as he could manage. "Would you answer me, Murty," he had written with rare eloquence in the language of Ruth to Naomi, "entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee. For whither thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God." Even now in his pocket was the little missive that she had mailed back in answer to his poetic proposal. Only the text in her dainty handwriting. Roy read it again and again. All of these delightful thoughts were running through his mind while he waited for the good minister, bent on advice, to answer him. "I'll tell you, Roy, I have not joined the matchmakers. I don't believe in that kind of thing. But for your own good, you really ought to be casting about. You will be the target in every church that has an old maid on its hands." Roy was highly amused. Encouraged, Elder Thompson went on, "Now, between you and me, there's a very lovely young girl living in Gloversville. She's the daughter of one of our evangelists and has now joined our forces as a Bible instructor. She plays the piano beautifully and in every way the ideal wife for just such a person as you. Roy, you should really become acquainted with Miss Murty Bohr. You would make wonderful companions if you both would only think so. And she would help you do a mighty work for God. Though Elder Thompson was quite out of breath from his long speech, Roy was so bubbling over with mirth that he could not answer, for fear he would give himself away. Elder Thompson wondered if he had in some way offended the young man. But Roy kept his head turned away and simply let the moment pass in silence and embarrassment. Elder Thompson was sure he had made a blunder, and he said no more. A few weeks later, the conference president was again in town and was pleased to observe that Roy did not seem to have any strained attitude toward him. He seemed just the same enthusiastic, cheerful young preacher. At a favorable moment, Roy made a little request. "Would you have time, Elder Thompson, to take a little walk with me? I need your counsel on a certain matter that should be decided very soon." The president was glad to make amends, if possible, for his speaking out of turn. So the two set out together. Roy had been apartment hunting, and he thought of a way he could break the news to his chief. He led him to the small, dainty apartment he had found and asked soberly, "Elder Thompson, do you think this would be a suitable apartment for a pair of newlyweds? I haven't had any experience in house hunting and thought I would ask your advice." The steel blue eyes of Elder Thompson were upon him. "May I ask," he queried in tones that tinkled with ice, "who this favored young lady might be, Roy?" Roy tried to be nonchalant, though he was almost bursting with pride and laughter. "It's a Miss Myrtie Ball of Gloversville," he said, as innocent as a babe. Elder Thompson gave him a resounding blow on the shoulders. They were both convulsed with laughter now. "Why, you young scoundrel," he roared, "you deserve a good flogging. When I had that heart-to-heart talk with you a while back, I went away just sure I had put my foot in it. You rascal, you didn't say a word. But since it is Myrtie, I'll have to forgive you." "It was Myrtie even then," Roy said proudly, "and we want you to tie the knot." "When is this memorable occasion to be?" asked Elder Thompson. "We would love to be married at your home at high noon, 3 weeks from Monday, if that will be all right with you," Roy said glibly. He knew to the minute what the date would be. "Would you be free to perform the ceremony?" The president got out his small vest pocket appointment book. Even while he was consulting the schedule, he could not help smiling broadly. "Yes, I can arrange it, my boy," he said. "But say, this is a real surprise. How in the world did you manage to keep it so quiet? A man in your position lives in a fishbowl." "We were very careful," Roy explained. "We didn't want the right hand to know what the left was doing." At last, the lovely day came, bright and gold and rose-colored for the two young lovers. They met and went together to the home of their conference president in Rome, New York. The good man and his friends went all out for the occasion, welcomed them, and served a wedding luncheon fit for a king. It was a day of all days, that day of their simple but beautiful wedding. Myrtie was practical. She told Roy that a wedding dress, a traditional one, could hardly be worn again, and she wanted to start her life in a sensible way. She did look lovely, and the young people were beaming with happiness. While the sleepy old clocks and the bell towers of the city were tolling the hour of midday, Roy and Myrtle exchanged their nuptial vows. As Elder Thompson joined their hands and pronounced them husband and wife, Roy could hardly believe that such a treasure was his to have and to hold for the rest of his life. And there was no more to do than that about their simple wedding. Yet after 60 and more wonderful years, they loved each other devotedly, took deep pleasure in each other's presence, just as they did on that day of days so long ago. The end of Chapter 7 of Pioneers Together by Josephine Cunnington Edwards.